and then I'll just write iterate on the
Let me advise if you want to turn your chair, let's do it now before we start. So we don't Thank you all for coming to our fourth installment of our parent series of wellness. Our North Star for wellness, I always like to say big, our North Star for wellness is how do we as a community create the healthiest place in the world to grow up? And is that even possible? I don't know, but I think it's worth heading in that direction. So we want to be talking about that. We want to keep partnering with the parents to think about, well, what is it that creates the best place in the world to grow up? And so we've been talking about, so far we've been talking about the culture and climate, and how do we create a culture, how do we create a community that is really strong for raising children, right? And so that's what we've been talking about so far. And today we're shifting to core competencies. What skills can we teach our children that will help them be, right? And so what's really interesting is the data is telling us our kids really, really need this, right? I mean, particularly post-COVID data is extraordinary about the need for this work. And then the research is telling us that we can teach this. This is teachable. Right? And so if our kids need it and it's doable, we need to do this as much as we can. We really need to double down and figure out how to do it. There's no manual how to do this, and so we're finding out what other schools are doing, working with places like Columbia Teachers College to see what research they have to work on how do we create the healthiest place in the world to grow up. And so, as I was saying before, we've been talking about culture and climate. Today, we're switching to core competencies and talking about what can we embed in our curriculum? What can we specifically teach our children about health and well-being? And so I've got the two smartest people I know right here working on core competencies for us. And it's really amazing because not only about what we're teaching, is that every teacher is involved in creating the core competencies. So it's fully enabling the teacher, fully invigorating the teacher that this is theirs. Right? We are creating this here at Louisville Collegiate. And so there's such a sense of ownership because they are creating it with the leadership of Clay and Stephen moving it forward. But that sense of ownership is essential to having it really happen in the classroom, right? Because normally when they see a head of school go off to a conference and come back with this big idea, it's like you're in the ocean and you see a storm coming, you go down 10 feet and you come back a year later, the headmaster's onto something else, right? Like, so when you have all the teachers really involved and buying into this work, it's been really amazing. So you're in for a treat today with Stephen and Clay. So let's give them a round of applause.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am Stephen Sowell. For those of you who don't know me, I teach English in the upper school. We're very excited that you're here today. We have reached a stage of what we're calling our internal rollout, in which we are beginning to introduce the competency movement with students, and we've started that in the past couple of weeks. We're formally introducing it to the parent body as of today. We're very, very excited about this work. We see it as having a profound impact on our students and on our educational program. So thank you very much for being here. Clay?
Yeah. You guys hear me okay? Sort of, it's like church, everyone's in the back here. My name is Clay Gahan. I teach English also. I'm the chair of the English department, and I'm also the dean of faculty, which oversees curriculum and faculty development and faculty recruitment. But I would say the biggest thing, the biggest part of my job is just trying to make sure that we are generally rowing in the same direction, to use a metaphor, but we are all sort of pushing kids in the same general direction. And I'll just say at the very beginning, I profoundly love teaching. It has been a huge gift to my life. And I teach English, I love literature, I love poetry, I love novels, I love teaching kids how to write, but that's not at the core of everything that I love. What I really love is being in the human being business, which is working with young people to grow into their best selves. And every kid, there is, some version of that kid that is their best self. And some of the rigors that we bring into the classroom, the ways we get to know kids, the way we push kids in their boundaries, the way we push their imaginations, the way that we challenge them to be problem solvers and to work together. These are all huge elements of why we love teaching and things they grow into. And so, not to go way back, but we were part of a strategic planning process several years ago. And we have this part of our mission, which is academic excellence, which sounds awesome until you actually try to get people to sort of drill down. What does that actually mean exactly? And we had really smart people and really caring people involved in sort of talking about that. But where we end up coming back to is we want our students to be lifelong learners. Now that is a cliche phrase, but what we really meant by that was we don't want them to reach some sort of academic peak at 18. If you were to think about their growth pattern, what we want is for them to be steadily inclining and steadily growing in their knowledge and their love of learning and their ability to learn. But not only do we want them steadily declining, we actually want that slope to slowly increase, right? That they, not only are they getting stronger, but they're getting better at learning, if that makes sense, right? It is a positive double derivative. You want to use some calculus just with that. But yeah, so we are slowly pushing them to be, and so when they're hitting 18, they're at their most primed, not only to do academic work, but to be in a place where they are ready to receive and enjoy the joy of a lifelong of learning. And we are firm believers, and if we do it right, not only will they be at their peak at 18, but they'll hit another peak at 19, 20, 21, because we really want our fantastic learners at age 30, age 40, age 50, not kids that have maxed out at age 18. We can certainly grind kids as much as we want into 18, and they can reach some sort of peak. We don't see the long-term returns in that in practical terms. And so what we're doing with these core competencies is really sort of asking ourselves, what do we most want for students? What do we really care about? Why are we in this business? I love Shakespeare. I love Charles Dickens. Okay, I love Jane Austen. They are not the reason that I'm teaching for 20-some years. It's your children. And so we are invested in them. And so in the principle of curriculum, it's popularized by Grant Wiggins, but it's pretty intuitive, which is this notion of understanding by design, that we can build understanding. But what you have to do to build understanding is first outline where you're actually trying to go. I taught this to some teachers in Tanzania several years ago, and they were kind of struggling with the concept. I said, okay, if I told you that St. Louis was 4 hours away, right? 4 hours away, and you say, okay, I'm gonna get in the car, I'm gonna drive 4 hours. And the chances are, you're probably not going to get to St. Louis if you just drive 4 hours, right? We actually have to know what it is we're actually trying to get to. And then we can sort of make plans to sort of, divert around there. And so in this principle of backward design, we decide what it is that we most care about. And there's a process of that. And then you have to use sort of reverse engineer. Well, if you wanted to have a student that could do this, what kind of processes would they have to go through? What kind of instruction? What kind of care would they have to get to be able to do those sort of things? And so in that principle of backward design, we're going to have a little fun. And thank you to Lucy Holder for spent a lot of time working, and it's an intellectually sort of and creative and work ethic challenge test, but we all work with people. And so what kind of people do you want to work with? Now, there's a little bit of a game here. I will encourage many of you, if you want to jump especially if you're Verizon, the internet here is, the cell service can be really, but if you want to get onto the onto the school's guest network. It should let you right on. And if you get your phones out, let's try this out. And let's just take a few minutes and see if we can't put just words in here. Let's build the word cloud together. What kind of people do you like to work with? And this is our own sort of practice of backward design. It's not so different than the backward design that we, in a more formal way, did as a faculty. What do we most want for our students? So take a little time, see if you can just throw some words up there, see if we can build. Go up to pollev.com, and then you got the number, and we've tested that it works. We got one more. If you need to give the LCS guest, no problem. You know. I think we're the exact right number. We, frugally, we are fiscally responsible here. We only pay for the free version, so there's a limit at 45. If you become the 50th person, then you can hold that in your head. It'll take just a couple more minutes, see what we can get up there. Give yourself 30 more seconds. So, I love that this is at the center and it's large. And it's larger means it was repeated. But we got learner, we got knowledgeable. If you're going to be an engineer and you're working in, or you're an architectural firm, or you're in medical field or anything, frankly, you want people to actually know what they're talking about. You want them to be able to bring something to the table in terms of discourse. That's not being lost in this sort of process. We are still deeply devoted to our academic challenges in terms of our core disciplines. And we firmly believe, in light of wellness, that students being challenged mathematically, students being challenged to do experiments, students being challenged to write papers is not the only part of being a well-rounded young person, but it's not discardable, it's not disposable. We really believe that being challenged in an academic environment is actually good for kids. So yeah, we want knowledgeable, okay? Inquisitive, caring, authentic, okay? Nothing's worse when you're working with someone and you have to second guess everything that's being argued. Like, that doesn't work. We want people that, and so our honor code is not just a part of like making this a nice place to be, it's also cultivating these skills that we want students to have when they go forward. Creative. It may have been true in the 1950s, 40s, or 60s that you could take a job and you would sort of possess that job and it would stay relatively stable for a long period of time. But most of us, and most of our children, as they go into the world, will have to reinvent themselves several times. And so we are not so much passing on a body of knowledge, but we're passing on tools to learn how to be creative, how to be thoughtful, how to enjoy one another, trustworthy. Can they work hard? Are they dependable? Are they curious? Are they okay being responsible and held accountable? Are you having to sort of cheer everyone up and sort of make them get excited in the morning, or is there some level of enthusiasm they bring? All these things make a huge difference. And I want you to think about, if we work with people like this in the collaborative environment, they are going to be poised to continue to grow and learn. And so this kind of thinking that you guys went through, a much more kind of, and we'll talk about the process, a much more intentional process, we went through and sort of said, what do we most want for students? And we began to identify those and then began to think about, okay, well, if we want those things, if we really want to develop students who are creative, if we really want to create students or foster students who are deeply collaborative or have great number sense or how to communicate with efficiency, okay, then how do we develop that? So I won't make us go through the same process again because I don't know how long it would take, but we went to this. I would venture to guess that a lot of the same things that you just put up for the people you like to work with are also things that you'd want here. And so I will spare us the redundancy, but I do want us to get that sort of idea is we are not just producing little computers. We are in the human being business. And so those things that we most want people to work with are also things that we want our academic curriculum to work to cultivate in an intentional way. So I'll hand things over to Dr. Sal. He just want to take it there, but I just want to give you guys a taste of some of the initial thinking that we went through. Which is say, we have a great curriculum here. But what do we most want for our kids, and how do we how do we tailor that curriculum to do the things that we most care about?
So our answer to the big question of what exactly do we want our graduates to be able to do when they walk across that stage at the end of their time with us is the core competencies. Clay and Rob are passing out the 8 core competencies. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read those, and then we'll keep going. Okay, so what exactly is a core competency? It's basically a skill set or disposition, and that we see these 8 core competencies as the answer to that question. What do we want our graduates to be able to do? What do we want our graduates to have meaningfully internalized by the time that they walk across that stage, okay? There are some that you might look at and think, this is pretty typical for an independent school. Okay, I think 4 through 7 in particular, from quantitative reasoning, from inquiry and innovation. Independent schools have traditionally very much been in that game of developing the mind, developing the cognitive self, right? Now it's modernized a little bit. So if you take a look at quantitative reasoning to analyze and to solve academic and real world problems. I wasn't solving real world problems in my math classes back in the 80s, okay? But that's a response to shifts in education about making education more relevant, more authentic assessment. You look at communication and you see I communicate effectively with a variety of audiences using multiple forms of media. That's different than it was when I was educated in the 80s. Digital literacy is something that we have a responsibility to teach in some form, okay? So 4 through 7, you might expect an independent school to invest in, and we continue to do so. Just understand it's modernized a little bit relative to our changing life conditions, which I'm going to say more about later. So what is a bit new, not brand new, but new in the sense of our commitment, is several competencies related to the inner self and a competency related to a communal self at the end. So just as important as cognitive skill, curiosity and creativity, a growth mindset, wellness, the communal self. Collaboration was so major in what you had in the word cloud. Intercultural engagement gets issues such as collaboration, diversity, equity, inclusion, a sense of oneself as a citizen and what that means for an individual. I'll say more about the inner self in just a moment. But what we see here is an excellent way to honor the whole child. In schools, collegiate for a long, long time has been invested in wellness in different ways. What's different now is I think we're elevating it to a new level, and we're trying to figure out how something like growth mindset, something like wellness might be infused within an entire curriculum, and not not simply be something that they might get in a health class or one-on-one time with a counselor. Okay. So why now? Why the shift? Why this new emphasis? Part of it is the information age. I think quite a bit about how I was educated in the 80s relative to how I'm educating teenagers today. And I deeply believe that if I educated them the exact same way that I was educated, to some degree, I would be doing them a disservice, okay? There was much of the ways in which I was educated that it still applies for sure, but times have also changed, and the information age is a great example of that. The way that we access information, that we communicate with each other, that we socialize with each other is profoundly different than it was in the 1980s. And educators need to respond to that. You see the rise of mental health concerns, and that predates the pandemic. The rise in mental health concerns with teens started in 2008 with the advent of the smartphone, and it only got worse in the pandemic, okay? A responsible school is going to take note and think meaningfully about how to respond to that. You also see an increasing amount of research in the past 20 or 30 years, and this is spilled over into popular culture, such as Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence book. We educators have taken note of an increasing amount of research suggesting the value and significance of non-cognitive skills. Emotional intelligence being as high or higher predictor of success and happiness as raw cognitive intelligence, okay? These are the things that we're attending to, that educators have been talking about in recent decades. And this is a lot of what is spurring the competency movement here at Collegiate.
So I'm struck by a couple of things. One, these are not things that we're all going to disagree with. I doubt someone here is ready to raise their hand. Like, I'm not into curiosity. So I don't know why we're talking about that here. Growth mindset, I'm pretty happy with where they are now. But that's not really true, right? So these are not like, controversial, but I think to just Dr. Sal's point, we are foregrounding them in ways that are really important. And that really gets me to this point. I'm looking at Ms. Holland, I'm looking at Ms. Goldstein, and they are proud alumnus of this school. If I go back to the word cloud, they possess lots of these skills, and we didn't have core competencies back then. So what does that mean? We've been in the human being business for a long time. We've had really smart educators here for a long time. They weren't robots that were like, I only teach this, okay? Lots of these important elements of being collaborative, being fun, being accountable were happening before we had core competencies. These are things that we've done well for a long time. But I would say that we have done them for a long time, and I went to a school that did it well too, but in a kind of implied or tacit kind of way. Do we want them to have a growth mindset? Yes. While they're playing field hockey, and they're in algebra class, and they're in science class, they're going to be learning those things, but they're going to get this sort of fringe benefit of this other benefit of being hardworking or trustworthy or collaborative. And that's true for lots of things. Do we want, I'll tell you this, for example, I interview lots of alumni to find out, like, hey, how's it gone since you left here? And I'm doing, informal surveys about, like, how can we improve our program? Sometimes they tell me very direct things like, hey, I've had to do a lot more statistics work in my post-high school life than I did when I was in high school. So we've taken adjustments to like offer more big data sets that we work with students. There's lots of positive things, but the one answer they always give, every single time, 100%, they all say, the biggest advantage I got from collegiate is I knew how to be in meaningful relationships with adults. That was it. Did I hit challenges? And I was really comfortable going to talk to people and get mentorship. And because I was comfortable doing that, I leaped ahead of my peers. Yes, they can write. Yes, they have good time management skills, but that's secondary to this ability to kind of like be a human being existing in the world and knowing how to get counsel. And so these are things we've been doing for a long time. We're just being deliberate about them. We're no longer saying this is sort of an understood part of being a collegiate student. We're putting out fun. We're very intentionally, this is what we're aiming for. Other advantages. As I said before, a big part of my job is to get people to row in the same direction. I am so blessed that I lead tons of really creative, deeply intelligent, committed teachers. I am not going in and like telling them what their lesson plans should be, to be clear. Like, I don't do that. What I do want to say is that are we aiming in the same direction? Do we share a same goalpost? To use Rob's word, do we have clear North Stars? And so in some way, this is applying some North Stars to our work. Let's be clear. If I'm trying to drive to St. Louis, I need to know where I'm trying to go. Okay. Teaching is a wonderful occupation. It may not get you rich. I'm waiting. Okay. It may not get you rich, but it does afford this unique opportunity to really dive into being a lifelong learner. And as someone who's taught for many years, a lot of times I'll change up my curriculum because I just want to be re-challenged. It's not that, Hamlet's no longer a good book. It is a good book. I just need to teach somebody else to do something different, right? To challenge myself. And this process has gotten us to all say, oh, we are engaged in this lifelong learning. What do we most want for kids? And then we get all these teachers together and say, hey, how do we do this? And that generated some creative energy. We've gotten some good, what you call it, flow state amongst faculty. Not always, but where they say, oh, this is why I'm in this work. I'm not in this work to grade papers. I'm in this work to kind of be engaged in these kind of questions. Okay, let's pause. I'm giving you a lot here, a lot of talking here. Before we move on, are there any quick questions that we can help with? Thoughts? Well, hold on to them. And obviously raise your hand anytime. Our process. So Rob mentioned earlier that like there is a trope out there in education that like some administrator who hangs out like and goes to a conference and they're like, oh, that's an amazing idea. And they come back and go, guess what we're doing, guys? And as he said, like everyone sort of like says, I don't know. What's nice about this is that we have a process here at Collegiate and where faculty can apply for innovation grants. In fact, I reviewed them yesterday. Okay, for this summer. And they can apply for an amount of money, and it's really a way to say, not all your professional development is going to be taking a course or going to a conference or taking some online course. Sometimes I want to develop a new unit. Can I get some funding to sort of just apply to try to be creative? And so several years ago, Dr. Sal, this is actually 2018, says, I'd like to apply for an innovation grant because I want to explore this new thing called the Mastery Transcript Consortium. What is that? It is just a body of schools, and they were just engaged in this kind of research about, hey, how do we measure student success? We weren't necessarily moving to Mastery Transcript as a model. In fact, we're not moving there now. But we wanted to take advantage of being amongst a lot of other smart individuals and kind of like join into our think tank. And so he was able to be part of a think tank. And then from there, he's like, there's some pretty neat ideas. I got some research. Dr. Shaw put together a committee, every division. Okay, it's about 12 people.
7.
A little bit less, 7 people across all divisions. And they began to work on identifying some potential, how can we do some more competency-based activities? So part of the challenge was there is, okay, I like this idea. And the challenge we gave the innovation grant, let's work on developing a portrait for graduate, where these sort of core, some people call it distinctive characteristics, some people call it sort of, principal goals. We call it, our core competencies. What are the things we most want to develop? So they began developing this as a group. And initially they had 11. And then over time, as we began to look at those, we began to sort of work it down. And then, this year they've been working on sequencing. So sort of pause there. So as we identified those, take a little pause, we identified those, and that committee that Dr. Sal chaired came back and said to our big sort of oversight committee called the Academic Affairs Committee. I'll get us out of the weeds here in just a minute, but they just said, okay, yeah, we can buy into those. Sort of validate those to continue the process. And so this year, every single faculty member and most staff members have been part of a committee that's either working on the sequencing of these core competencies. So what that means is that you sort of, and Dr. Shaw will show you some more here in a bit, is you can say, okay, what we really want is this end goal of a student who is really confident in terms of communication. What does that look like? Work backwards. What does that look like for a junior and senior? What are they able to do? Okay. Well, if we want a junior and senior to be able to do that, what do we need 9th and 10th grade to be able to do? Work our way back to all the way to JK. And we had groups of faculty, every single faculty was involved in that kind of process over the course of this year. So the nice thing is you're gonna have these sequence documents, which they're curriculum documents, they're technical, but every single faculty member should be able to point to from that document and say, oh, that's my line. Yeah, that was I contributed that. Oh, I really worked hard on that particular block, right? And a big goal of this is to be able to say, and it's part of this process where we are right now, Dr. Sal's really, really smart, and he's got great ideas, but we don't want this to be Dr. Sal's idea. Instead, we want it to become our idea, right? And the process this year has been, hey, let's get everyone involved. So that's a part of here. And then as we developed those, we gave them this, we had advisory meetings this 2 weeks ago, last week, to get student feedback. It's actually the same format you have there. And we're going to process that element. So multiple conversations with academic affairs committees. We sort of, and the academic affairs committee is just composed of department chairs, division heads. So people that are part of implementation can look at that and say, yeah, can we get behind this? So format for that's the part I was talking about earlier today. Was is we got everyone participate, multiple committees devoted to sequencing. Some committees working on grassroots efforts. So just to talk about this, we also had 3 committees that were, one is developing the plan for what this stuff looks like discussions of what colors to use and how to format it. Other groups are like, hey, what's the right process? Do we go to students, go to teachers? Can we go to families? How public should this be? Other ones, this is going to be a shift. And Dr. Shaw's been talking about, some committees are working on what might this look like in year 1? We're not going to, it's not a light switch. So what do we do in sort of initial phases? We'll talk about this process called small bets and some other concepts here. And then finally, the milestone committee, which Dr. Shaw will talk about more in depth here, is whether it be in 4th grade, whether it be in 8th grade with the Me project, whether it be a senior capstone, whether it be the May term, there are these places in our community where students take on these milestone sort of achievements. And these are activities of high social capital. People really care about them. But they are outside of our core classes right now. So these are areas where we're going to do a lot of initial work to measure these core competencies in ways that we can continue to teach algebra the way that we teach it now and slowly move culture. So there's some inroads here that we're going to, some milestones, developing those milestones and aligning those with some of these core competencies. This spring took a group up to Chicago where we met with 3 different schools that are really in the same process we are. Now, some are far more liberal than we, more progressive than we are. And they're asking about we're good with the core competencies. Can you tell us about how to align that better with core academic work where we can offer that? Or we went to Culver Academy, which is a far more traditional school than we are. But they're really devoted to leadership and to citizenship. And so they have this very rigid academic program, but they want these other things too. And so we had a great conversation about, hey, how do you begin to develop some of these tactics? Really great conversation. And we both picked up details, and it was nice to be able to be the people to share some details as well to solidify those. And then internal rollout, which you are participating in currently. All right, these over to Stephen to talk a bit more about some of these initial plans here.
We want to give you just some quick glimpses of what faculty have been doing, kind of where we are. I'm going to click on the sequences.
Oh, yes, sir.
We're not going over this in depth, just a quick snapshot. You can
Starting
see
block one.
you can see the competencies down below. We have different tabs, but this is what most of the committees have been working on this year, sequencing out what does curiosity and creativity look like for JK and kindergarten. We went with 7 levels rather than 14 because 14 felt a little too rigid. You take the skill of reading, that all doesn't come online at the same time. Kids grow into reading fluency at different ages and paces. So we're working with 7 levels instead of 14 to give us more flexibility. Maybe if you want to just click and show them a few more. Sure. Just growth mindset. Wellness. We're at what we call the solid draft stage or rough draft stage, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what kind of revision work we're going to start. You want to go ahead and show them one of the rubrics?
Yes, sir.
This is an example from our grassroots committee. We've had parallel processes going on. So we've got some committees working on sequencing. We've got one committee working on, well, what does this look like on the ground? What does this look like, if you take one of these criteria and you assess for it, even if there's a grade associated with it or not, if you're just giving formative feedback to a child, what does that look like? And we've had experiments with rubrics, such as this one with reading.
It's small.
We'll jump to and here the yellow represents some of the competency language from the sequencing that we're starting to build into older rubrics that we've had. If you will go back to, hold 1 second on the capstone.
Yes, sir. You want to go back here?
No, I want to set up the capstone.
Got it.
But this is fine. You may be wondering, well, what is this going to look like on the ground? What are specific examples, concrete examples of how competency-based teaching will impact the classroom? Rubrics is one way, but we also wanted to give you an example of another. And to some degree, that's to be determined. We're in a process of discovery, and we're figuring out as we go. But one change that we're making next year is one of the milestone moments with the senior capstone, okay? We already have a wonderful me project. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but at the end of the 8th grade year, the end of their middle school career, they have this reflective presentation in which they speak to their classmates about their development throughout middle school. That's a wonderful example of competency-based learning, well-rounded learning that we already have in place. Wonderful example. Another example of a milestone moment, and we're looking at a reflective showcase as well as a passion project for each division, and that will look very different from lower school than upper school, but we're thinking about that for each division. One thing that we're going to do next year is we've had a senior capstone project that's lasted about a week. Okay, we are expanding it to about 3 months, and we're embedding it in the spring semester of the senior year. So they have quality time devoted to it. You go ahead and do it. Flash the components up. Hopefully this will be readable. Just that top part. Can you all read that? I'll give you a moment to read. So I want you to imagine where a senior in the spring semester currently is, all right? They are facing that pernicious pandemic of senioritis. They're understandably burned out. Their next best step is not to be guided through a 25th novel by their English teacher. Their next best step is to take on an independent project of their own design and their own choosing. And it again, at a time in which they're facing significant burnout, it appeals to intrinsic motivation and gives them an opportunity to exercise some skill sets and develop some skill sets that they might not otherwise. This is an example of a change that will take place next year that is very much in response to the core competencies, particularly something like curiosity. School is a highly scripted endeavor. Students show up and we're often telling them what to read, what problem sets to do, what kind of assessments to take. And a lot of that's good. You know, we're older, supposedly wiser, and we've got good ideas about how to develop children, right? But at some point too, how are we going to give them a chance to cultivate curiosity if they're not able to design their own learning experience, if they're not able to identify a passion and pursue it? Curiosity is just one thing that a project like this touches on. And, well, I'll just keep going. Some of the questions that popped in my mind will be answered as we go. So, next step, a small committee is going to take what are essentially rough and solid drafts and convert them into strong drafts for piloting. We'll be piloting in the fall. We'll have some professional development, probably both internal and external. Next spring, we'll be in a good position to revise once again based on the piloting effort and figuring out who does what when. We're looking at full implementation in 23-24. Full, I think, is a bit inaccurate. I think it's going to be an ongoing process for multiple years. But basically, this is roughly a 5-year process that we're completing the 3rd year in. I want to emphasize that what we're about is evolutionary, not revolutionary. Okay, this is not a radical change for collegiate. In my mind, it's smart, judicious growth in response to life conditions. So we will still cultivate outstanding academic skills. If you know anything about Clay and me, you know that we are pretty tough teachers and that we are very determined to teach fundamentals, okay? That will not change. We are not throwing out the baby with the bathwater here. We will still cultivate academic excellence. So, that said, you'll still probably see a greater emphasis on reflection and metacognition. A lot of those opening competencies on the inner self demand greater awareness. To have emotional intelligence, you need to have awareness of your emotional reactions. To have a growth mindset, you need a reflective capacity. Attention to so-called soft skills. It's hard to find a label that suits a lot of these non-cognitive skills, and a lot of people in the education field refer to them as soft skills, which does not quite feel appropriate. But nonetheless, you'll see more attention to skills like growth mindset, coordination with project-based learning and real-world problem solving. We do a fair amount of project-based learning now. You know, you might see a Middle Ages project in the 5th grade. You might have heard some of what's going on. We've never really, as a community, stopped and tried to understand the progression of that. It's somewhat random how it happens, okay, depending upon the teacher's disposition. So part of what we're doing here is being more deliberate, intentional, coordinated with something like project-based learning. How do we prepare a student for something like a senior capstone project? How do we do that? We'll be asking questions about that. And of course, emphasis on wellness as well. Let me shift.
So a couple things here, and I'll give you some examples from my own teaching here at Collegiate. So I remember very vividly when I was dean of students in the upper school that I was part of a discussion and we were reading a novel that dealt with revolution in Egypt. And you know, it was a moving novel, and we got to a really deep conversation. And I had a number of students say, like, I think I understand how to disentangle some of the political challenges that are happening in Egypt in the 1970s. I said, that's outstanding. You know, like they are really like thinking deeply. They're on paper. They've got like some really like deep ideas. And then I had to go to lunch the next period. And I was working with some of the same students, and it was part of Student Senate, and we were organizing a bake sale. And they said, organizing a bake sale is impossible. And you say, well, you were just solving the political conundrums of international challenges. Like, but in the abstract, those things are pretty like in simulation realm, like you can do those things, but actually getting like organized to do an actual bake sale with real people, like that's actually like a real challenge. And if you've done any meaningful work, we want you to be able to do both, right? We want you to write meaningful essays about what's going on in the world. We also want you to be able to like do things. And this capstone project is sort of tied into that. But we also want students to get this, and this idea of wellness is we're not sort of floating heads. We need to be able to take care of ourselves. But I also go back to the initial question of with whom do we like to work? And we probably all had experience where you work with someone new, and initially, like the first week, first month, maybe even the first 6 months, they are on fire. You know, emails returning within an hour. They're just, you know, in there early, you know, staying late, all in. And then, whether it's after a week, whether it's after a few months, start checking out. Go ghost for a long time. Start calling in sick a whole lot. And it's not because they are intentionally, it's just the idea that like, we are not functions. If we're going to engage in the term, and we're going to be engaged in the marathon of lifelong learning, we have to have some awareness of like how to take care of ourselves to be able to endure that kind of journey. And so when we think about these core competencies, we're the JK-12 school. There are challenges with that, but there's great advantages to that. We have some time. We don't have to race. And we can cultivate these things in a way that says, okay, we're going to spiral. Spiral curriculum means like we keep circling back to these same ideas. The idea of growth mindset is not a second grade unit that we then never come back to, right? It's something that we can keep coming back to. We want them to be able to develop these skills to be able to say, I want to be able to think really deeply about this. I want to be able to produce polished work. And I need to be able to know how to ask for help. I need to be able to self-advocate. I need to know how to like say, you know what, I could stay up another 2 hours and get this done, but that means I'll be useless tomorrow during class. Like maybe I should go to bed now, ask, you know, talk to my teacher and say, hey, I'm a little behind, but actually get something out of class the next day. These are all skills that we want our students to be able to cultivate. Again, I just keep coming back to this sort of principal idea. We're not trying to hand over some canon of knowledge. We don't teach because we love knowledge or this sort of body of knowledge. We teach because we really love kids, and we're in the human being business. And so this idea of, we feel these core competencies are ways that we can give ourselves North Stars to be deeply in the human being business, of which quantitative reasoning, of which like writing big papers, of which, you know, I'm looking at Ms. Kaplan, you know, writing papers about artificial intelligence and things like that. Like we want students to be able to do that. And that's not all. We want them to be human beings in full. And so I think we're kind of getting there to the end, but before we get to your activity, you can give us some feedback. We're interested to hear your thoughts. This school doesn't work without a collaborative effort. And we want people to be, again, if we get our teachers rolling in the same direction, we want some families, you know, understand that direction as well. So, yeah.
Question.
Yeah, please.
That senior project.
Yeah.
Do you currently have a senior project? And what is it called? The Capstone project?
It is, and it is, you know, I think a lot of schools have these sort of projects, right? Yeah. I think that as we did not allot adequate time for it to be done as well as you would like. So you have some students that are very self-driven. They get their reasons, say, oh, I've been wanting to do this project for a long time. And they're ready to go, and they sort of get after it. We have a number of students like, look, I was just trying to finish my last paper, and I have these AP exams, and I'm just getting wrapped up, and like, sure, yeah, I'll build a sailboat. Like, let's try, right? Like there's a lack of kind of, and I think that we were, if I was put it in sort of business terms, I think we were getting about a 35% yield of, of like really meaningful projects, and summer was kind of the final step.
It is now, Clay.
Is that?
Can you define?
Oh, sure. It's a week long. It's a week long single project.
And now you're suggesting, did I see 3 months?
But it's part of a course. So it'll be part of a course, and Dr. Shaw can speak more to that course. But yes, it is a project, but it will happen within the structure and scaffolding of a led class by a teacher.
Okay, it's 3 months.
Yes, but it'll have several stages to it. That a good bit of scaffolding, like a proposal stage, a research stage, with then they'll get underway with, there'll be multiple progress checks. They'll have some kind of final product that will be due. Some of the projects they'll be creating something. Some of them they will not, because they'll be experiencing something. So they would probably have a longer reflective piece they would need to generate. And then that final month is presentations in English class. So it's not like there are about 6 stages to it, if that makes sense. It's not just that they're thrown off on their own for 3 months.
Just having the senior. But you said it's integrated into the class, though, because it's not just because the spring semester is tough. Just trying to get them through. So it's added into the English class already. It's not sort of like an additional, like you said something like instead of teaching the 25th novel, we'll be integrated this instead.
Yes, and English won't entirely go away.
Entirely go there,
but it will be the key focus of the curriculum, particularly in the months of February, March, and April.
That midterm week, what happens? Is that when they get time to put the paper or the final project together? When everyone else is doing midterm, which is normally Capstone.
Yes.
Are they finished by then, or are they putting together something that using that time?
We're looking at the showcase taking place the morning of May 24th. And so between then and graduation, beyond whatever they need to do to prepare for graduation, I'm not exactly sure what's happening, but they have no midterm. That 1 week period in which they did the capstone won't take place. This is the actual capstone. This will become the capstone.
Do you only have the students present to their class, or is there any kind of public community presentation of all of them together?
Both. Yeah. They will do a dry run in English class, and then we're looking at hosting the showcase becoming a conference-like format, a TED Talk-like format with about 10 concurrent sessions and 5 sessions overall. And so, yes, we are looking at that.
So are the current capstones graded, and how does that work? Do they get a letter grade, and how will that compare to what you're doing with the 3-month project? Is it graded as it comes through? How does that work?
It's currently pass-fail, right?
It's currently pass-fail. It's a graduation requirement, but it is an auxiliary program that they conclude at the end. But it is a graduation requirement, but again, it's pass-fail. There's a big showcase where they to share their ideas. This will be a far more sort of, again, scaffolded. It's a deliberate process, and there will be a portion that is tied to their English grade. But the completion of a successful project is, you can't say, I've already got a 90 in English, I'm going to skip the capstone because I can get a 75, by failing. That you have to do that.
That's the difficult thing, is there's a lot of morning things, like graduation in the middle of the day. There's the award ceremony. To do it in the morning makes it really hard. Just logistically.
Thank you. I'll talk to Ms. Gahan about that.
Just hard to make it.
Yes.
Hi, I really love these core competencies, and what I'm wondering is their discussion underway. It seems like it's wonderful in the senior capstone, but to start in lower school, like it seems like a great time when the children are young to build and build and build. So is there any concepts or talks about how to integrate something like a capstone into, starting in lower school where they have a little more agency to choose their own project? Mm-hmm. And pursue their own passion?
Yes, we're looking at a milestone project for 4th grade that is developmentally appropriate for a 4th grader. And I believe the 4th grade team's working on that this summer. So yes, and it's, we have a biography project in 3rd grade, maybe something along those lines. I think they've talked about looking at a project around culture, something that would have a little student direction, self-guided interests, but with a good bit of support given their age.
Additionally, in some respects, our lower school is already much further along in some of these processes than we are in terms of cultivating these core competencies within the fabric of their classes. You're right, we don't have a big project like a capstone in 4th grade. I do think that's meaningful. Again, we have a chance to really sort of demonstrate what we know in a public way that makes a big difference. And student accountability and sort of the level of effort they put in. That being said, I would say that, our middle and upper school, I would say, as you get more and more sort of academically focused on some of these elements of reflection, some of these elements of softer skills, get squeezed out. And so I would say in some ways our lower school is better for us. There's a lot more reflection. There's a lot more sort of focus on, having a growth mindset, being creative. But encapsulating in a big project is something that we're continuing to develop.
Yeah, exciting. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
See, these guys and you guys have, so thank you very much. It's exciting. Couple things. I love the project concept. I think that is going into more of how are they going to move in the future to be able to self-educate. Are you tying in any SMART goals into your concepts within the project itself? And you know what SMART goals?
Yeah, sure. So one step that we're talking about is you're right. Like, what I'm not going to do is go to, Joyce Gerwin in 1st grade, who's been teaching brilliantly for a long time, or Simon Stern in the upper school, who's been teaching math for a long time, and say, like, all right, everything you've been doing up to now is wrong. We're going to something different. Like, that's not going to happen. But we do like this concept of small bets, which is to say, okay, I already have this project. I'll give you an example. Like, Simon Stern does a project. He's done a project with Coopers and helping them develop the most efficient barrels. And they use integral calculus to sort of develop that process. And that's a cool project. They've been doing that for a while. So you have a small bet, you say, I'm going to take that project, but I'm going to add some elements of self-reflection, or I'm going to add some component of transfer application to some other task, which is not changing the project itself, but again, kind of oriented in ways that more deliberately hit these core competencies. Going back to what I said before, taking it from being sort of a tacit aim of the project to making it an explicit aim of the project. So I think we're going to, and every teacher each year sets a set of goals, a set of SMART goals for themselves. In the future, some of those SMART goals will be from a leadership, we say some of those need to be anchored in core competencies so that they can begin to say, okay, I'm not going to change my whole class. I'm going to change this one thing, and I'm going to try to be more intentional about, incorporating more innovation into my projects. So that gives you some idea.
So I guess the other thing I want to bring up is I think measurable is very important. That's a reflection, right? To be able to measure your performance. And then you can say, yeah, I did a great job. Well, I need to improve in this area.
Absolutely. And, this is one, when you teach writing, I teach writing. One nice thing is that I can fall back on hundreds of years of people that have also been teaching writing. And there's lots of tactics that kind of go in that I can build on. I don't have to create it myself. There is less history in some of these other areas. And so as we develop those metrics, we're going to have to use our own intelligence to identify ways that, are we measuring what we want? But no, this is not going to be just sort of a feel-good thing. We are going to make sure we have areas to measure. Yeah.
It's not more a question, more of a comment. I am extremely excited about it because I think some of my, I would say, worry was as we're going through the school process that some projects are specifically tied to a teacher. The teacher requires, like, we know the project, like a 20 book challenge. But and I'm talking about like lower middle school, high school is more structured. So I think this puts it in kind of framework that I should, as a parent, I would not worry, like, if I don't get this teacher, they're not going to read this book, or, they're not going to cover the history in a specific way. So to me, it's very exciting and encouraging, and it also kind of puts all those intrinsic, like you said, values that we teach kind of in the forefront and say, we are doing deliberately that biography project in third grade because that's kind of what prepares them for capstone versus we kind of do them and you know, sometimes the parents, we don't even get the full picture for prospective parents or prospective students. So I think this is just amazing. First of all, we kind of, you know, formalize the project. And then in addition, now everybody's on the same page and we don't have those issues like something we fall through or it's not consistent. It's just amazing.
Thank you.
Oh, only can you speed it up? I'm having a senior time.
Okay. Yes, organizing 130 people speedily is not always the best tactic, but we will get after it. And just to, again, I'll brag on David some more. Her son David took on something that the Guild project, which we have in the high school, which is basically kind of like a high school version of the thesis. And, you know, her son is really bright and he can do lots of things well, but I guarantee he's going to remember that paper that he wrote on AI because he put a lot of personal investment in it. And that skill, not only does he have a lot of knowledge about AI because he engaged in this project, but he also is aware that I can do that kind of project. I can't tell you how important that is for when we instruct students. Like, I do want them to produce meaningful projects. I also want them to come out of the process like, I'm also a person that can do this kind of project. That self-awareness pays massive dividends, right? So I don't know if you're giving a presentation to you guys. Students always say like, I hate speaking publicly, I hate speaking publicly. And the nice thing is when they do speak publicly, they figure out like, okay, I don't love it, but I actually am a person who can do that. And that knowledge can actually pay big dividends.
I think it's really neat. I think part of the success of this probably becomes getting the students to look forward to doing this. And so as parents, you know, how do we support that as well as community? How do we support that? Because I mean, I would show up at these presentations to go see what the students are really interested in and what they're, you know, what they've spent their time doing. So, I mean, I hope that students really do look forward to this. It's a true gift to be able to do something like this rather than check a box, you know, because there's some agency behind it, there's some self-direction. So it's really neat what you guys are working on.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Just real quick, I know we're up against time. I love all this. I'm just ask you. I'm sure you've thought this through. You've got 4 collegiate cornerstones and now 3-6 8 of these, and I'm sure you thought about how to integrate the two. You know, I fear that on these 2 months we'll lose the cornerstones, and I'm not sure these directly map the cornerstones. You can turn them into behaviors by rejiggering a bit so that they do map more easily. I've seen in companies, when you do this, obviously people can carry them on their ID badge, and when they do performance reviews, you have to tag the behavior or competency that reflects the performance review. I'm sure you've thought about this. I just, considerations, just need to be very mindful about how this matches to the cornerstones and make sure those don't get lost in this effort.
Yeah, that's a huge point, and you know, I don't know if Steve, you want to speak to like some of our editing process this summer is, as you work on these sequencing, is how do we make that connection more overt? If you have more to
That's been on our minds. And try not to throw too many lists at faculty. In fact, we met with Rob and Jim a couple of months ago about this very question. One thing that we're looking at doing is infusing cornerstone language as much as possible in the criteria of the competencies. Research I've looked at suggests that gentleman mentioned the idea of these being measurable, these competencies, and that's very crucial. And research I've looked at suggests that values are much more difficult to measure, and that we might not want to try to measure that with something like respect in the same way we would want to measure something like a skill or a disposition. So it's a great point. I don't think we have a perfect answer for it, but it is on our minds as we move forward.
That's good. I mean, absolutely. Thank you all.
As we break, that was absolutely terrific. Thanks, guys.
Dr. Sal and I have 10 minutes before we have to go to our advisories and shape our current students. If you have time and you want to leave some feedback in those particular areas, we'd love to collect those, and those will be integrated. We had every faculty member and every student do those as well as the ones that could write. So if you have time and you want to leave some feedback on their form, I would love to have it. Otherwise, just know that we're really grateful for your partnership. This stuff, again, if it's just Dr. Sal's and my idea, it doesn't actually do anything. It's just paper, right? We need you guys to buy in, to be a help in that sense, and we're really grateful that you're here.